Deciding. We are live at the Mind Israel Broadcasting Studio. Thank you, everyone, for being here. Can you see me? Okay, so thank you all for being here. It's so special to be back. I guess it hasn't been so long, but over Hanukkah vacation, it just feels like a very long break. So to kind of recap a little bit about what we are up to and what we've discussed up until now, we are learning a Tanya share, and we're in chapter 15. We're finishing chapter 15, beginning chapter 16. And up until now, we've been discussing the Beinoni. Who is the Beinoni? Who is this intermediate person, the struggler, the in-betweener, the person who is always fighting within himself? And here the Alter Rebbe discusses three different types of Beinoni. So last class, we were discussing the first type of Beinoni, which is called the Beinoni Loyavadai, the Beinoni who he's basically he's not experiencing the Yetzer Hara like I think most of us experience the Yetzer Hara. His Yetzer Hara is dispassionate. So he's a person, how's that possible that he's a Beinoni, but he's not actually really struggling? And the idea that we kind of developed, and this is what the Alter Rebbe describes, is a person who has like a few different character traits that basically match up and make him who he is. It's someone who deeply loves to learn, is not really someone who loves materialism, and is someone who's just not really a passionate person in general. And if you have all three of those character traits, then you kind of fall into this category of being a Beinoni, but it not being a struggle for you to be a Beinoni. So you're just outwardly doing everything that is supposed to be done. And at the same time, it's not really very hard for you. And there's not a lot of people like that in the world, but it is a possibility that you could have all three of these character traits combined and then show up as this kind of person. But most of us don't feel like we fall into that category. Most of us definitely feel like we struggle, and most of us feel like we often very much fail. So what do the other Beinonis look like, and what are the other Beinonis? So the next category that we're going to be talking about is the Beinoni of the mind. And this is the Beinoni of the mind. The Beinoni of the mind is the ideal Beinoni, according to the Alter Rebbe. He is the one that the Alter Rebbe is actually catering to here. This is the way of Chabad Hasidus, taking the approach of the mind and speaking to the intellect of each and every person. And so the Beinoni of the mind, you would say, is like the Alter Rebbe's favorite. It's favorite kind of Beinoni. So let's talk a little bit about what that looks like and how is it possible to live in that space, this Beinoni of the mind. What does he do? How does it show up for him? What are his struggles, etc.? So going back to the beginning, a Beinoni is all about your outward projection, right? It's about what you do. It's not about the inner struggle. It's about how you present. And when we talk about that, we're not just saying that it's your external actions that matter and nothing else internal matters. It does. But Judaism doesn't judge you by your internal struggles. We end up judging you by the external things that you do, how you ultimately end up presenting yourself, which is much more forgiving, right? So what's the difference between a Beinoni and a Tzaddik, for example? The biggest distinction is, even though they kind of externally show up the same, right? They're doing the same mitzvot, they're doing the same good deeds and refraining from the bad deeds. A Beinoni is experiencing a struggle, or this first level of Beinoni where he's not experiencing a struggle, but he doesn't disdain or hate Averis or anything other than God. A tzaddik, a person who is completely righteous, who doesn't have a struggle at all, experiences a level of hatred towards anything other than God. Otherness bothers him. He hates it. He despises it. It is otherness, and so he wants to negate it. He only wants to experience and see and celebrate and be aware to God. The Beinoni doesn't have that hatred. He doesn't have that virulent feel of, I can't stand anything other than God. So that keeps him in that category of still being a Beinoni. Now, just an interesting piece of information to kind of like think about. Oftentimes when people are in this experience of self-work or developing oneself, this sometimes comes up as a way forward, where, let's say with coaching, I'll share with a woman something this actually happened to myself. I could speak about a story with myself. So this is kind of a funny story. So one time I went to, and just stop me if you know this story. One time I went to the park and I was there with my then 3.5 kids. And I met someone who was also there at the park, and she had 3 kids, but her husband was there with her. And which is normal. I started comparing us and I was thinking, wow, why am I here with 3.5 kids by myself? And she's here with her husband. And not because I was upset at my husband at all. That's not what I'm saying. I was looking at myself and I'm saying, why am I doing this to myself? And she came up to me and she's like, wow, you're like a super mom. You just could do anything. Look at you. And I walked away from that actually feeling bad. Why am I being a super mom? Why am I doing this to myself? Or I'm doing something that's very, very challenging. And I remember sharing that with a friend, and she said, what is it about being a super mom that was once really exciting for you and is now no longer exciting? And what I came to realize was in the beginning, or maybe earlier on in my self development, I wanted to be admired. I wanted people to say, like, wow, she's amazing. And then as I've, I guess, grown in my own journey of self worth and seeing my own value without needing to be affirmed by other people, there was this shift of, oh, I don't want to be affirmed by other people. I don't want to do crazy things that is just an invitation for me to get that affirmation from other people. So in the past, where I used to do things that were very challenging or very hard in order to get that kind of admiration from others, now it felt distasteful for me to enter into something like that because I'm not searching for that anymore. Why am I doing that still? So why am I sharing with you this story? There's a shift here of deeply not caring for something that you once cared about. And instead, maybe even almost hating that piece and shifting away from that, not wanting that part of yourself so that you could grow into something greater and much more. And that is, in ways, kind of channeling what a tzaddik does. A tzaddik hates otherness, hates anything other than God. And sometimes when we grow, it's kind of like breaking out of a shell where you had this one shell, this one limitation. Right here, it's like this seeking admiration or affirmation from other people. And then suddenly that felt not right anymore. And I don't want that anymore for myself. And I'm breaking out of that shell to approach something different, something new. But part of that process of growth is sometimes looking at the old self or looking at maybe yourself right now and saying, I don't want that. And when you acknowledge that deep, I don't want that for myself, it actually gives you that ability to break out of that shell and approach something new. So what do I want? How do I want to show up instead? What does it look like to go to the park with my kids without seeking admiration or being a super mom? Like, is there a possibility for something else for me to be more? Do I need something? Do I need more support? So I want to go with only 2. Just like other options and other modes of being kind of will show up as soon as we break out of that limitation of, I don't want to be like this anymore. I want to be something more. I want to make space for something new. So that's just a side piece that I think is an important thing to kind of think about, because it's not like you're actually there and you've changed, but a part of the process is what I've been so far is not as appealing to me any longer. There's a level of distaste for it. And that's where the growth happens. Okay. So what does it mean? What does it mean to become the Beinoni of the mind? What is the Alter Rebbe bringing to us when we're talking about the Beinoni of the mind? So here, the Alter Rebbe is introducing something that the Rebbe actually speaks about in Hayom Yom. The Rebbe wrote the Hayom Yom for the Frierdiker Rebbe, and in one of the days, he says that the ultimate resurrection of the dead happens with learning Chassidus. How? Because you're taking something that was completely lifeless, our mind, our brain, which could be the complete opposite of acknowledging God being the absolute source of life, right? You can have someone who is an agnostic, an atheist who negates the existence of God. The only reason they could do that negation comes from their brain, from their mind, which means that they're cutting themselves off from their life source. So imagine taking something that literally has the potential to cut itself off from the ultimate life source, from God, and then taking that and resurrecting it and bringing it back to an absolute connection back with God. That is the real resurrection of the dead. Us taking our minds and transforming it to holiness, allowing our minds to see God as opposed to ignoring him or seeing otherness. And that is what Chabad Hasidus is. Chabad Hasidus is different than other Hasidisin, where other Hasidisin was all about passion. It was all about feeling emotions, experiencing that emotion of love and fear of God. Chabad Hasidus almost takes like a clinical, cold approach to our relationship with God. Why? Because it's taking an intellectual approach. Now, not to say that that is not supposed to lead to Yira Shemayim, Ava and Yira, and that is the whole entire point of the entire Tanya, and that was said on the title page. What are we trying to do? We're trying to serve God and perform his mitzvahs with Ava and Yira, and that is something that is very close to you. And we start off with using our minds, which could feel almost like a cool passion or kind of like a cold fire, because that's what the intellect is. It's kind of it has that distance, it has that boundary between feeling that passion and that connection and that yearning. There's that taking an objective point of view, which makes it feel very cold. Now, when the Alter Rebbe brought this approach to Chassidus, he actually got a lot of pushback from a lot of his fellow Chassidim, not fellow Chassidim, fellow what's the word? People who were also Chassidim of the Mitzler Rebbe and the Baal Shem Tov, contemporaries. Thank you. His fellow contemporaries at the time, there was a lot of pushback, which was extremely painful for the Alter Rebbe because he was already getting a lot of pushback and criticism from people who negated Chassidus in general. But then to get it from his own brothers, right? I mean, we're all brothers, but to get it from the people who are supposed to be like-minded, who also love Chassidus, who are also fellow Chassidim of the same Rebbe, to feel like you're getting pushback from those people, that was extremely painful. And it's actually interesting. I didn't even know about this. The Alter Rebbe wrote a very, very long letter explaining the reason why he took this approach of Chabad Hasidus, why he's taking this very intellectual approach. And he's not just explaining it, but proving why it's crucial to be taking this approach right now. One of the examples he brings to his fellow contemporaries was the Gemara. And he says, you're forgetting this famous Gemara. And he brings this famous example of a ganef. A ganef is a thief, but an armed thief. There's different levels of thief. We're talking about an armed thief, a man who is coming into the house, and if he's caught, he will kill or be killed. So much so that the halacha is that, and this is not really so PC, but the halacha is for someone like that, if he's coming into your home, you kill first and ask questions later, because it's your life or that person's life. There's a level of this person being like a raidif, like someone who is chasing after you to harm you, and you're able to, in self-defense, hurt them first. Except, and this is just an interesting halacha, except if the person is your child, right? So a father will always have a level of rachamim for his child, but a child will have less of that rachamim for his father. So if the roles were switched, it's just interesting. This whole story in the Gemara. But why does the Alter Rebbe bring this experience and this whole concept of a ganef? What's interesting about the ganef is that, and this is also a story in Hayom Yom, where a ganef could be planning and have had an entire, intricate plan on how he's going to invade this house and steal whatever it is that's in that house. And right before he goes in, he could actually pray to God. And the question is obvious. This person is about to maybe, right? He has the potential to be a killer. He has the potential to be a murderer. And yet he is turning to God that he should have success in his mission. And the question is like, how is that even possible? How is it possible for a man to be a calculated potential murderer and then still turn to God before he's about to do this terrible act? And here is where the Alter Rebbe explains to his peers that we have a level of disconnect that is happening just as human beings in our lives, which is we could have faith, we could have emunah that there is a God in this world, and still have an absolute disconnect from that having any sort of impact on our actions. So the Alter Rebbe proceeds to say, it's not that I think that I should be bringing up questions and that we should be approaching Torah from a space of only intellectualism and we have to challenge every single thing and we could only understand it if we want to perform it. That's not what I'm saying. Of course, everyone has to have first a base level of emunah, and we all have that. We all have an inherent emunah within us. There's a deep understanding because each and every one of us have an neshama. That neshama in some level of itself, right? There's 5 different levels of neshama: nefesh, ruach, neshama, chaya, yechida. The deepest part of your soul, there's a level of that soul being inextricably intertwined with God. There's also a part of that the Kabbalah explains is an experience of 2 doves looking at each other. That's the way the Kabbalah explains it, where one dove is looking at the other dove, and there's this expression of love, of just looking at one another. And that experience of just looking at one another with the gaze of love is what your neshama is experiencing at every single moment of its life. It's just gazing at God. There's no other experience other than God in its experience, right? That's all it's seeing. And that's inside of you, maybe very deep inside of you. And maybe that's not something that you feel is something you relate to or even understand or see consciously, but it's still there and it's hidden and it's unchangeable. It's always there. You have that faith. And there's a breach between that experience that part of your neshama is having and your actions. Because if you really were completely attuned to that level of your neshama looking at God with a face of absolute adoration, like 2 doves look at one another, then you wouldn't be sinning, or you wouldn't be the ganef who's about to perpetuate a theft or a potential, God forbid, murder, and be davening to Hashem for your success and turning to him and saying, please make me successful. Please make sure that I don't get hurt. So this disconnect is what I'm addressing here, is what the Alter Rebbe says. There's a problem here. We have the faith. Of course we have the faith. I'm not saying that we have to approach Judaism with only intellect and we should be questioning everything and we should be in any way cynical. I'm not saying we should be cynical thinkers. I'm saying that we have to bridge the gap between the emunah that we have inherently and what we're experiencing on a day-to-day basis when we're constantly engaging with the struggle of whether to sin or not, or whether to engage with Torah and mitzvahs or not. So this is not technically a new thing, right? The Rambam speaks about this. The first mitzvah in the Rambam's Svarim is, in the Sefer Mitzvahs, is we have to know God. Leida Hashem. We have to learn and know God. Now, what's interesting is when the Rambam came out with that as his first mitzvah, he also got pushback, which was also so interesting. Why is he getting so much pushback? And it's for the same reason. There's a fear of asking questions. Because what if you ask a question and there's no answer? What if you ask a question and then suddenly there's a lack of bitachon? What if you suddenly become the cynic? What if you ask so much questions and you don't have the answer that you completely lose faith and go off the derech? And so because of that fear, there was this pushback of, no, you just have to have Kabbalah soul, absolute acceptance of whatever it is that God has given us. And if you ask a question, you're breaching a trust that we all have with one another that we accept. And of course we all accept. That's what we did at Har Sinai when we said, Na'aseh v'nishma. We accepted without question, because that is our inheritance from Avram Avinu, to have that deep level of emunah. It's there always. And it is also our duty as human beings with a soul that we bring that consciousness to our day-to-day life. And that doesn't look like questioning God. It looks like coming with a deep belief of God and also saying, I want to know you better. I want to make that recognition of you a part of my real life. I don't want to just go about things like as if I'm a robot and not ask any questions. I want to bring my real self here and also bring that recognition of you to every aspect of my life. And that's what wasn't happening. That's what was lacking. And that's what the Alter Rebbe is bringing here in speaking to us as if we are a Beinoni and saying you can become a Beinoni by addressing your mind, by starting first with how you think. So again, this is not about being skeptical or cynical. It's not like we're coming to the Torah and coming to our Judaism and saying, you have to prove that Judaism is meaningful to me. We know it's meaningful. Now we're exploring it more. Rabbi Peltiel gave this great example, the difference between the Rasha and the Tzaddik in the Haggadah. In the Haggadah, there's 4 different sons, and one of them is Rasha and one of them is a Tzaddik. The Rasha gets his teeth knocked out or sharpened, and the Chacham is the one who is celebrated for his question. And when you look at the questions, they actually kind of sound pretty similar. So the Rasha says, what is it that you're doing, right? He's sitting at the Seder table and he sees what's happening and he says, what is it that you're doing? And he gets his teeth knocked out. And you look at the Chacham and what he says, what is it that God has taught you here? What is it that God has asked you to do over here? And the question is like, it's kind of both of them asking a question of what's happening over here. And the difference is the Chacham is acknowledging that I am one of you. I believe in God. I have that here. The Kabbalah soul is a given. And I still want to understand what's happening. I still want to know because I don't see or relate to, or I'm not conscious of this experience that you're all having when you're engaging in this Seder on Pesach. The Rasha is saying, I don't know what you're doing and I don't feel anything connected to it. And what is God? That's the voice of Paro, right? The voice of Paro who he negated when Moshe Rabbeinu brought to him that God has sent me here. He said, who is your God? That's the voice of Paro. That's a voice outside of our nation. That's a voice not one who is accepting in Kabbalah Sol and has Emunah. That's a voice of otherness. And God took us out of Mitzrayim so we wouldn't be experiencing that otherness. He took us out as a nation. And the fact that he took us out as a nation and instilled in us this experience of, I am here for you entirely, and you know that, and you have an neshama that is experiencing that constantly, we have that inner hidden love and emunah always. And now we just have to kind of bring it out of ourselves. And we do that with our mind, with discussion. And here the Alter Rebbe brings in this concept of contemplation, okay? And I know that we've spoken a lot about contemplation and what does it mean to be misbeinen or to engage in hispaininus. But here the Alter Rebbe is really opening up kind of like layers upon layers to really help us understand how this is going to affect us on a very deep level. When a person spends his entire day thinking about something, right? This is a common thing. Or even if it happens a few times throughout that day, oftentimes we dream about it, right? You'll have that dream. I know my daughter's like, had this dream this morning. I'm thinking, what was she thinking about yesterday that made her had this really interesting dream? And not always is it completely reflective, but oftentimes it is. Like I know for myself, I'll have a dream and something happens and I think, okay, it's because I was a little afraid about that. And it just kind of expressed itself in this really strange, really weird dream, but I could see the correlation. So the idea is that even simple thoughts throughout your day deeply affect you on all levels of yourself, your subconscious, your conscious self. It even creates more thoughts in your dreams, in your thoughts while you're sleeping. How much more so the things that you engage in when you're thinking about, what you're thinking about throughout your day are going to affect your actions, the way that you interact with people, and the way that you view yourself and God. So here the Alter Rebbe is bringing in this concept of you need to study him, because if you study him, then you will have that ability to relate to him. But if you just depend on this, like, I have Emunah, and of course I do, and I of course believe in him, then that's beautiful, but it doesn't relate to your actions. You have to bring your human self, which is lifeless, right? The brain could be absolutely lifeless and completely lacking connection to God, but you have to use that as a powerful tool towards channeling to every other part of yourself, right? Every other part of your human body answers to the brain. So let's take that brain and direct it. There's something very interesting that I experienced when I was in Israel. I was in a school called Mayinot, and I was a shlucha there. So for some reason, um, what's it called? Masa? Was it Masa? It's Masa. So Masa decided Masa is an organization that helps bring Americans to Israel and kind of carries them through that whole experience. And it's very involved with Americans in Israel. So Masa wanted all girls and boys. There was probably a separate program for boys, but all girls who are like madrichot, who are like dorm counselors or kind of in a leadership role, to come together and to train them. So we had to go for 2 days to like this leadership program that Masa created, which is like a totally not firm program, but they wanted to teach us certain leadership skills. And it was an amazing experience. So we did all sorts of activities together, like team building and leadership. One of the things we had to do was they brought us to 2 pretty big outdoor pens, like corrals. And one had a bunch of sheep and goats in it, and the other one was empty. And they split us up into 2 teams, and each team had to take the goats and sheep and bring them to the next corral. And we were the first team, so we had to experiment and they got to watch us. So what happened was, I'm not afraid of animals. I love animals. So I was like there and trying to get the sheep to go into the other pen, and I'm clapping and I'm like trying to lead them. And some girls in my team are like running. Oh my God, they're too scared. And others are trying to do what I'm doing. And we very not elegantly got all of them finally, probably after 20 minutes, to the next pen. And the group that was coming after us was able to like study what we did right and what we did wrong. And they didn't share it with us. They just went out and implemented it. And within minutes, I see one of them, the tallest woman in that group, is standing in front of a goat, and she's walking and the goat is following her, and then all the sheep kind of just like followed. And then the rest of the women on her team kind of just like were like this in the back to make sure there were no stragglers, but they just like seamlessly brought these sheep and the goats into this next pen. And when we discussed it afterwards, what was fascinating was they observed us and they said, "You have no leader. Sheep are followers. They love to follow each other." And what we noticed is none of you are leading. You're kind of just pushing. And so they're scared and they're running away. You needed to create and present a leader. So what they did was they actually really studied it, and they saw that everyone was following this one goat. So they got this one goat to follow the tallest woman in their team, and he followed, and then the rest of them just followed. And this is the imagery that comes up for me when we talk about speaking to the brain, approaching the intellect and saying, our brain is what has to lead the rest of our experience. And some of us are more passionate people, some of us are more emotive people, and that's okay. The Alter Rebbe is addressing all of us. It doesn't mean that you have to be a tremendous intellectual. It doesn't mean that you have to have tremendous depth. Everyone here has a brain, and so therefore you are leading your own experience. And what also comes with that is a measure of accountability, right? So if I just like kind of take this backseat approach of I'm just going to lean on my emunah b'tachon, and I was born a Jew, so therefore I'm doing my Jewish thing and I'm doing the best I can. There's a little bit of like just taking a backseat role and not being an active participant in my own growth and how I show up as a Jew. As opposed to the imagery that the Alter Rebbe here is giving to us, which is such an empowering experience, which is you have a tremendous tool at your disposal. Use your mind to control the rest of your body, to lead the rest of your body, to lead the rest of your experience on an everyday basis. With every action that you do, every interaction that you have the ability to be the leader here for your own experience. You can't just say like, oh, whatever, I'm just sitting back and, I'm davening and this is what I was taught to do and this is the way my mother did it. And this is actually introducing something so much more that you have. There's like a measure of belief here that the Alter Rebbe is sharing with every single one of us. Yes, you have a latent belief. Yes, you have emunah. Yes, you have a latent love for God. And you have such a powerful potential to latch onto it, to really live from that space and to really express it. And here I'm going to give you the tools how to do so. I trust you to do it. You have the ability. Let's engage on how to do so. So there's something very empowering about it. There's a level of accountability with this parak that we can't just take a role on the sidelines. We have to be an active participant in how we show up as an neshama in this world, serving Hashem. And we also have an incredible tool at our disposal that we could really use to our benefit. So what's interesting about looking at faith for a moment is its strength is also its weakness, right? The fact that it's always there and it never goes away is very powerful. And at the same time, the reason because, right, the fact that it's such a constant also means that we don't look at it as much, right? And this is something that comes up all the time, right? So, for example, let's say you have a relationship where, let's say a person is married, or let's say you have a parent or a sister or a brother who shows up for you in a certain way, right? So let's say the husband takes out the garbage every single day, or your mother makes supper for you every single day, or you have a sister who calls you to check in on you all the time. And it's a constant. It's something that's always there. The sun always comes up, the sun always goes down. The weather in LA is always good, right? There's something that is always there. And because it's always there, it's tremendous, it's powerful. And the fact that it's always there means you don't really see it, appreciate it, acknowledge it. So its strength is also its weakness. And it's a little bit scary. It was a little bit scary for the Alter Rebbe to point that out to his peers. Yes, we have faith. Yes, we have emunah. And it's there, and no one's questioning that. And there's a piece of it that is working against itself, right? The fact that it's a constant means that we could just rely on it and not take an active role on how we show up as from Yidden. And he, as a powerful leader, was saying, I'm not going to just sit by the sidelines and let my adherents take that kind of approach to their Judaism. I see so much more from every single person. I'm not going to just label them all as Siddiqim or label them all as Rishayim. I'm going to let them know that I deeply see their experience, which is a struggle. And they can engage with that struggle by not just relying on their emunah, but also relying on the other tools that they have. And again, that was scary, but it was something that was very powerful for us to hear and for his peers to also recognize and know that yes, it's scary, but at the same time, let's talk about these things out in the open and acknowledge that emunah is working for us and it's also sometimes working against us, and we have to actively engage to overcome it. So what's the point of the Alter Rebbe's Chabad Chassidus? It's not just for the point of intellectualism and intellectual pursuit. It's in order to anchor that emunah that we have, in order for us to deeply acknowledge the emunah that we have, to bring it out, to channel it. That's what the intellectualism is supposed to be. It's not supposed to be about questioning. It's supposed to be about finding, acknowledging, bringing to the surface. Okay. So when we really get into and express one word that we're talking about over here, the word is das. Now, oftentimes das is defined as knowledge, but the way that the Torah talks about das is it speaks about it from the realm of connection, deep connection. When it says that Adam connected with Chava in order to create a child, it uses the word das. Tremendous connection between Adam and Chava. But when we talk about das, we're talking about connecting with, let's say, an idea, connecting with a part of ourselves, deeply acknowledging who we are. If we're just living with that emuna, that latent emuna, then we're not deeply connecting because we're kind of just leaning on. But if I could bring that emuna out to the surface, then what I'm doing is, first of all, I'm really living with it. I'm really bringing it out of me. I'm deeply connecting with it. The only way to deeply connect is to use the midas that come right before das. And that's the chachma and the bina. To use my wisdom and to use my analysis. If I could use my wisdom, understanding, and basically my mind, and channel that, then I'm able to connect that deep latent emuna that I have and deeply connect with it so that I could be experiencing what it really is. What is it? That level of deeply seeing God, deeply knowing that He's involved in my life, that every aspect of my life is Him. Right? So, what does this look like practically? With the everyday things that happen for us, right? So, a store owner who's struggling and another store opens up and is selling the exact same thing, right? And the tremendous fear surrounding that, the struggle around that, how hard it is to make a living, right? So he's in the throes of it, that struggle. And he's compartmentalizing, right? So a part of him is like, he's working so hard, he's making the calls, he's trying to get more customers. And yeah, he knows that there's a God in the world and that God orchestrates things, but he's not deeply connecting with the fact that Hashem made this other store open up. Hashem is making sure that he's taking care of me. This person's not taking away anything from me. Hashem is taking care of me all the time. He's not connecting with that deeply seeing God. He knows there's a God in the world, but the deep seeing, it's like that level of bitachon, is not necessarily something he's connecting to. The das is missing. He's exactly like the ganef who's praying to Hashem before he's about to go rob a house. We don't want to be a ganef. We don't want to rob ourselves of our own lives and the potential that we have to deeply connect with God in this world, in a physical world, have a deep, close, open, seeing relationship with God. So what else would that look like, right? So imagine a child who is that one child who deeply gets under your skin, or not even your child, a person who gets under your skin. That person was put there for a reason, right? So you could just take a back seat and just say, like, this person's so annoying. Or you could just cut them out of your life. Or you could get angry and scream at them, whatever. We have lots of different choices. Or you could look at it and say, there's an opportunity here for me to see that Hashem orchestrated this. There's a reason why this is happening. I want to deeply see that God is involved in every aspect of my life. Is there a way that I could think about Him and His involvement and His love and His care in my life, and then channel that into trying to find out, why is this happening here? Is there an opportunity for me to grow? Is there maybe something about this person that I could learn from them? Is the challenge that they're bringing to me something that I have always struggled with, and now it's just an opportunity for me to really work through it? But for me to not see it is, again, just like that ganef, where I know that there's a God in the world, but I'm not deeply seeing Him and what He's bringing to me in my life and the opportunities that are presenting to themselves to me in my life. There's a growth experience here. How am I missing it? So being mispainted, and the way Chabad Chassidus talks about hispainis, we're going to talk about it a little bit more, save more for next time. But hispainis is a deep connection with a concept. When we meditate, this is a little bit different. When you meditate about something, I don't know anyone here who meditates. I certainly am not a professional when it comes to meditation. But from what I understand, meditation is a clearing of the mind. And that clearing of the mind is then an opening for something else to show up for you. Being misspaining is a little bit different. When I'm contemplating on something, I'm contemplating on this one idea, and I'm attaching myself to it and connecting with it and developing it and opening it up more and more and more so that I could see it show up for me again and again and again. Right? So there's a story of, For example, there's a beautiful story of the Friedrich Rebbe. When the Friedrich Rebbe was taken into um, imprisonment, so the people, the sergeant at the time who was taking him, was waving a gun at him. It's a famous story, waving the gun around at him and saying, "You see this thing? This thing makes a lot of people really afraid." And the Friedrich Rebbe's response was, "People who are afraid of guns have only one world and many gods. I am someone who has one God and two worlds. And that's not something that is scary to me." And immediately the man put away his gun because he saw it wasn't really having an effect on the Friedrich Rebbe. What was that interchange? Friedrich Rebbe was so obviously a tzaddik, someone who's so deeply connected with God and saw his world as something not in any way disconnected from God. He was also so deeply connected with the fact that there's a physical world and that the neshama lives on in another world, that death wasn't something that was really so scary to him. Why? Because he had the das, the deep connection with this godly concept. Let's say just the concept of two worlds, of my neshama lives on, that my neshama is forever. And it was something that he's so deeply connected with that nothing can breach that connection. So when he was presented with something that would be very scary for most people, God forbid dying, right? Or the potential for dying, or a gun, or anything around that, which is very scary for most, his connection to his soul and the fact that the soul lives on no matter what, and he deeply connects to his life source, that to him was not scary because he was living that level of connection with that idea. Another example of a story, I'm trying to remember the exact details of this story. I forget the exact details of the story, but it was a similar example of a rabbi being threatened. I'll have to return to you with the exact details. It was with Rabbi Ades, and I'm trying to remember what was threatening him. There was something threatening him, and he responded with saying, "I am a Jew, and I was taken out of Mitzrayim, and this doesn't scare me." I'm trying to remember the details. I can't remember, but I'll look it up and share with you again for next time. What was so beautiful about his response was so telling, that he so deeply connected with the concept of Yetzias Mitzrayim. One of the Sheish Zechir's 6 things that we're supposed to remember on a constant basis, that we were taken out of Mitzrayim, that Hashem is the Lord who brought us out of Mitzrayim. And he's so deeply connected with that idea that even faced with something so scary as this challenge, whatever it was, his life, this idea, because he was so mispaining on it, he was so deeply connected with it, it didn't affect him, whatever it is that was coming up, because he's so deeply connected with Hashem is the Hashem of our fathers who has taken me out of Mitzrayim, so therefore I'm connected. He wasn't shaken. So now, we can't all relate to that level of being mispaining, but what I'm trying to illustrate is the difference between, let's say, meditation and being mispaining. When we connect ourselves to an idea and deeply live with an idea, then it starts channeling itself and showing up in all different aspects of our life. A beautiful example of this is a little shout out to a podcast that I love listening to, which is Human and Holy, right? Beautiful, human and holy. And in it, every single guest featured on there is a woman who has taken a concept in Chassidus or Torah or Kabbalah, and she lives with it. And then she shares how it shows up in every aspect of her life. That is being mispaining. That is taking a concept and deeply connecting with that concept and seeing how you start seeing it everywhere. Kind of like the pregnant woman theory. When a woman is pregnant, she thinks everybody's pregnant, or everything. Like it happens a lot with people where they feel like they're suffering from something, so everyone also has the same issue. It's a little bit like projecting. So it's funny to say, but when we are deeply connected with the concept in Judaism or a concept of Chassidus, we'll start projecting it to all parts of our life. It will start showing up everywhere. That's what the Alter Rebbe wants us to start doing. Take a concept, whatever it means to you, whatever you connect to, and start thinking about it. The more you connect to it and start thinking about it more and more and process it again and again, you'll see it show up for you. That awareness is the first step towards becoming a Bainani of the mind. So I want to stay with that. And we'll talk about that a little bit more next time. But something to kind of just leave off for you, an invitation to journal about it. Like, what does that mean? What is an idea that I connect to? Is there a concept that I deeply want to think about more? Do I ever give myself time once a week, every night, to journal about it, think about it, discuss it with others? Is there space for that to just kind of like live with something? Is there a question even that I think about all the time? Do I challenge all the time? Not because it interferes with my base level of amuna, but because I struggle with it and I want to struggle with it more. And if you don't have one, then explore other people's, right? So like let's say listen to this podcast and see what other people are talking about. Do you connect with it? You'll find you connect with more concepts than you think. So it's just an invitation for the next 2 weeks, but that awareness of, is there something here that I could connect to and think about and process and give myself time to kind of gestate with it and see what shows up for me. Okay. Have a beautiful day.